Hello, my name is Lila Jamord, and this is my brain hat. This doesn't really fit on my big head, so we're kind of just gonna have to hold it and make it work. Okay, so firstly, there are two cerebral hemispheres called the left and the right hemispheres. They're separated into lobes, and they contain gray and white matter. So before I start, I'm gonna preface by saying, from the observer's perspective, the hemisphere on my left is the patient's right hemisphere, and then the hemisphere on my right is the patient's left hemisphere. So I could say, from my point of view, the side to my right is the left, which I labeled right here, and so on and so forth. So now I'm going to demonstrate some cuts. So the sagittal cut divides the brain into left and right halves. So to imagine this cut, I can slice the brain from anterior to posterior, separating, so I could move it all the way from the front of the frontal lobe all the way to the back to the cerebellum to create that, sagittal cut, or the left and right halves, I mean. And then the coronal cut, it divides the brain into anterior and posterior sections. So the cut would travel dorsal from the top toward the bottom, from the top to the bottom. So I could start from the primary motor cortex and go all the way down to the temporal lobe right here, and that would create that front and back sections. And then the horizontal cut would divide the brain into dorsal top and ventral bottom portions. So I can start from right here, and it would create that dorsal top and then that ventral bottom right there. Ooh. So now we're going to talk about which hemisphere is the most dominant for language. So in most people, at least, the left hemisphere is the most dominant for language production, or speech production and comprehension, because the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area are located in the left cerebral hemispheres, in majority of individuals. So the first lobe we're going to talk about is the frontal lobe, and that's the most anterior portion of the brain, and it sits dorsal to the eyes. So here's the frontal lobe in the left hemisphere, and then the frontal lobe in the right, and it's right there. And its executive functions is like planning, problem solving, decision making, and it also contains the primary motor cortex. That's not it. Primary motor cortex right here and right here. So the primary motor cortex is located on the precentral gyrus, which is part of the frontal lobe. And it generates voluntary motor commands, and it controls movement of specific body parts. And then right behind it is the primary somatosensory cortex, and that is located in the parietal lobe. And it's part of the parietal lobe, but it's in the postcentral gyrus. Am I showing you it good enough? It's part of the postcentral gyrus, and it's directly part of the parietal lobe. So, in the functions of this primary somatosensory cortex is it receives touch, pressure, temperature, and pain information from the body. So basically this area lets you sense like when your body is being touched. Next we have the parietal lobe right here in the right hemisphere, and then right here on the left hemisphere. And this is just posterior to the frontal lobe, and it's mostly on the dorsal surface of the brain. So its function is it integrates sensory information, and it helps with spatial awareness and navigation, and it's important for your understanding where your body is in space. And like damage in this area can cause like problems with spatial reasoning and stuff like that. And then the temporal lobe right here. It's on the lateral sides of the brain, so here it is on the right side of the brain, and then here it is on the left side of the brain. It's more ventral than the frontal and parietal lobes, and it's located near the ears. So the function for this area is hearing and auditory processing and memory formation and stuff like that, and especially language comprehension. It contains the Wernicke's area. And then the occipital lobe. It's the most posterior part of the brain. Its function is, visual processing, like interpret shapes, colors, motion, and depth and stuff like that. So here it is on the right side of the left side of the brain, and then the right side of the brain. Everything you see basically gets processed here before being interpreted by other parts of the brain. And then right in the back, or in the bottom, so you could say, this is the cerebellum. So it's dorsal to the brainstem, which would be right here, and it's ventral to the occipital lobe. So it sits at the, like I said, sits at the lower posterior part of the brain. And this little thing right here, its function is it coordinates balance, posture, and fine motor control. And it helps make movements smooth and precise. And also it's involved in motor learning. So the language areas, the Broca's area, where am I looking at? This is the parietal lobe. Okay. So the Broca's area is located in the left hemisphere in the frontal lobe, and it's specifically on the inferior frontal gyrus. And it's right here, Broca's. So the function for this, it produces speech. It controls the muscles used for speaking, and it helps form grammatically correct sentences. So this is the formation of the speech, So damage to this area can cause something called Broca's aphasia, where a person knows what they want to say but struggles to speak. And then on the other side, in the temporal lobe, right here, the Wernicke's area. It's in the left hemisphere in the temporal lobe, temporal lobe, and it's toward the posterior end of the superior temporal gyrus. So this function, the Wernicke's function, the function of the Wernicke's area, shall I say, it's important for understanding and comprehending spoken and written language, and it helps assign meaning to words and sentences. And damage to this area can cause Wernicke's aphasia. It's where speech sounds fluent but lacks meaning. And yeah, that's about it for this brain hat that doesn't fit on my big head. Anyways, yeah.